Hello and welcome back. I am a hacker and it's really nice to have you on board. In this video, we'll create something similar to LastPass password generator. It would not be the exact copy of this LastPass, but we'll create something similar to this. You would say, Mr. Hacker, why do you want to create something similar to LastPass password generator? Well, it's really important from the start of your career to start creating your own security applications. Like this video is exactly targeted for the web developers, because if a web developer is creating a website and he needs to add an extra layer of security by adding a password generator in his website, so he can easily create this password generator by following this tutorial and he can embed that in his website. So let's get started. So the first thing I did was I opened this Atom text editor. You can use any text editor, even you can use Nano as well. But for the sake of simplicity, I want to use Atom right now. We'll use Vim and Nano in some other tutorial, but right now let's just get started with Atom. So I have opened up Atom, and in Atom I have opened up an empty folder, and you can do the same. Once that's open, I'll create a new file by the name of index.html and press enter. By pressing enter, it will save the file in that folder by the name of index.html. Now I can write HTML inside this. So in Atom, I just typed in HTML and pressed enter, and it generated some random HTML for me. For you, it might not be the same because you might be using another IDE that might not generate the HTML automatically. Suppose you are using Nano, so it's pretty simple to write. You can just write doctype HTML, and it's just to notify the HTML renderer that we are using HTML5. Then the start of HTML, in that we specified we want to use English as a language in this HTML, and then the dir, LTR. You can remove these things as well. You can just write HTML, that would be enough. Then I wrote down head, and inside the head I wrote down that I want to use the character set UTF-8, and after that I specified title, which is empty right now. So let's give it a title as password generator. And once we are done with the title, let's make it random password generator. Once we are done with the title by giving it random password generator, let's come over to the body of this HTML and create some nice looking HTML. Let's just first run this page and see what we have. So I have opened up this file manager. I will go to Python projects, and then I will go to this demo. Once we come over to this demo, let's open up the Chrome browser. You can use Firefox or any other. It completely depends on you what kind of browser you use, but for me, Chrome would do. If I run the file index.html, it won't show anything because we haven't added anything in it. But if I come over to Atom again and just try and add h2, and inside that h2 I write random password generator and close the h2 tag, save it, then come back to the Chrome again and try to run it, you would see that it will print out random password generator. Now I need to do quite a few things, as we have seen that our HTML is working fine. So the first thing I need to do right over here in this file is create a div and wrap everything inside that div. And to this div, I want to give a class by the name of input box. And we'll wrap this h2 inside this div. Now I will give it one tab in order to make our code look a little bit more better. For the code readability, it's always necessary to indent your code properly In fact, there are certain type of extensions available in Atom IDE or in other IDEs that will auto-indent your code, but it's really a better programming practice to indent your code properly and work with it from the start. So we have created a div, and inside div we have taken an h2. What I want to do is create an input box. Like if you come over to the last pass, you see here is an input box, and here we see a button which randomly generates the passwords. So for displaying the password, I will take an input box whose type would be text and whose name would be empty, because I don't want to give it a name anything, and its placeholder would be create a password. So what this placeholder means is when it's empty, just show create a password, and we'll give it an ID of password. Do note that if you give it capital P or small p, like the ID is case sensitive. So if you start the password with capital P, you need to then later on reference it with capital P in JavaScript. Or if you started with a small p, then you need to reference it with a small p in JavaScript later on. What else I want to do to this input box is I want to make it read only, because I don't want to allow the user to insert anything from his own self, because we'll generate its value from JavaScript, which would be a random password. Now the next thing I need is a button. So I literally don't need a button. I will create a div right over here, or I will add a div right over here, and later on I will make a button out of it. So I will give this div an ID of button because we want to create it a button, and for now I will just leave its on click empty, and I will close this div. Once I close it, inside we'll write generate password. So this would be the text of the button. Let's come over to Chrome and check out what we have. So right now we have pretty basic things. We have an h2, an input box which is read only. Inside that we have a placeholder, and other than that we have this generate password as a div that we will later on create a button out of it. Now with this we are done with the HTML part. Now the next thing we need to do is add some styling to it to make it look a little bit better. So for that I will add a file, and that file would be a style sheet, and whose type would be text.css, and whose URL or href would be style.css, and that's it. Now let's create that file. We'll create that file inside the demo folder, and that would be style.css as we have named it. Let's just change the color of body to green in order to check that our file was successfully embedded. If I reload the page in Chrome, you would see that indeed our style sheet was added successfully. Now I will remove this because we don't need it, and I will add some useful CSS in it. So I have pre-written these CSS because if I try to do everything right over here in front of you, it will take a lot of time. So that's why I have created some CSS already, which I will type in front of you, and which we'll add, like with the help of which we'll add styling to our document. So the first thing would be I want to add this thing to all of the page. So that would be margin 0 pixel. The next thing would be padding 0. You can write pixel or you can leave it empty, completely up to you. The next thing I need is font family. And I have added consola. By default in Linux, the consoles doesn't comes, so you need to search it in Google and add it to Linux first. In Windows it's pre-added, but in Linux you have to manually go and add the consoles font family. You can use anyone you like, but my preference would be to use the consola. The next thing we want to add is user select none, and I will save it. And I will come to the Chrome browser, reload the page, and you would instantly notice that our font family has been changed and a little bit styling is also changed, which is we have 0 padding and 0 margins. Now the next thing we want to add is something to the body. So what I want to add to the body is I want to make the display as flex, and I want to justify the content in center. The next thing I want to do is align the items in center, and then I want to give it min height of 100 VH. Then I want to give the background color as #F8, F8, F8, and I want to save the program. We'll come to the Chrome browser again, and you would instantly notice that our styling has been changed a little bit more. Now coming back towards the CSS style sheet. Now the next thing I want to give is, if you go to our HTML, I want to give styling to this input box. And what do I want to give it? So if I'm willing to give the input class styling, I will just write dot input. And do note that whenever you are willing to give some class styling, so you need to add a dot in front of it. If you're willing to give style to an ID, you need to add hash in front of it. So right now we are giving styling to the input box, which is a class. So I will start it with a dot. Anyway, what I want to give this input box is position, which would be relative, and width, which would be 450 pixels. And I will save it, come back to Chrome, reload the page, and you will instantly notice some changes to our web page. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to give this heading styling. So how can I access this heading? Well, it's inside the input box div. So I can access this by writing input box, and in front of it I can write h2, and now I can give it some styling. So I want to make the font size of this h2 as 28 pixels and the color as #333, and I will save it. Come back to Chrome, reload the page, and you will instantly see something has been changed. Now the next thing I want to give is I want to give styling to the input box inside of this input div. Now how can I access? As always, I can write input box, and inside that we have input, and I want to give it styling. So to this input I want to give a lot of things. The first thing would be I want to make its position relative, and I want to give it the width of 100%. The next thing I want is I want to give it height of 60 pixels. Now the next thing would be I want to make its border none, because I don't want to give it any border. Now the next thing we need is margins, which would be 15 pixels for the top, 0 pixels, and then 20 pixels for the bottom. And I will save it. Let's reload the page and see what we have. So you can see that we have something a little bit more stylish. So now we have something a little bit more stylish. Let's give it a little bit more as well. So I want to make the background as transparent, and the outline, I want to make the outline as none. Then we have the padding, so I want to make the padding top and bottom 0, and then right and left 20 pixels. I will save it. Now we have the font size. So I want to increase the font size, and let's just make it 24. And if you don't like it, we'll change it later on. Now the next thing is the letter spacing. So I want to increase the letter spacing a little bit and make it 4 pixels. Now the next thing I want to change is the box sizing. So I will write box sizing, and let's just make it border boxed. And you can try out different styles with this box sizing and with all of these things. Like, you can tune these values and see effect for yourself. Let's just save it and come over to the Chrome and see we have a little bit more different design, and it's looking a little bit nicer now. Let's add some more styling to this input box, and the more styling could be, we can add some border radius, that would be 8 pixels, and we can also add some color, that would be #333, and the last thing would be, let's add some box shadow. So the box shadow is a little bit complicated. You can just Google it and it will come up with a lot of different things. Like, I always Google it because it's a little bit difficult for me as well, but for your understanding, you can just Google it and it will come up with a lot of different details. Anyway, for the sake of simplicity and for the sake of saving some time, I will just paste some random values, and those values would be -4, -4, -10, and then the color that we want to specify. And then in the inset, you can also arrange these things in next line as well, but just for the sake of simplicity, we have this inset, and then like after the comma we have inset, then we have 4 pixel, 4 pixel, 10 pixel. There it was in minus, but right here it's in positive. It's 4 pixel, 4 pixel, then 10 pixel, then 0, 0, 0 in the RGBA, and at the end it's 0.05. And it's the same for the third one as well. So I have repeated this first in the third, and then I repeated the second and fourth place. Now save everything, come back over to Chrome, reload the page, and you would see a really nice shaded input box right over here. Now the next thing we want to give style to is this generate password. Okay, so as I said, that if you're willing to give an ID styling, so you can reference that with starting it in JavaScript as well as in CSS, started with hash. If you're willing to give styling to a class, started with a dot. Anyway, so here we want to give the input box, and in the input box, inside that we have the btn, and to that btn I want to give styling. So what would be the styling? Its position would be relative, and its cursor would be pointer, and its color would be #FFF, and its background would be #333. Its font size would be 24 pixels, and its display would be inline block, and its padding would be 10 pixels top and bottom, and 15 pixels left and right, and its border radius would be 8, as we have given 8 above as well. So I will save it, and then I will come back and refresh. So you can see it didn't get the border radius, I think so. I must have made some mistake over there. So yeah, it's border dash radius. And once I save it and then come back to our Chrome, refresh the page, you can see that we have a really nice design right over here. Now the next thing we want to do is when someone clicks on it, we want to change its color. So how we can do that in CSS? Well, it's pretty simple. I can just copy and paste this input.btn, and I can make a little bit change, and that would be on active, which means that if the button gets clicked, we want to change some of its properties, and that would be changing its background. So you can either change its background to #FFF and change its color to, like, it would be the opposite of what we have specified in the above thing. So the color would be #333. And if I save it, come back to Chrome, reload the page, and if I click, you can see that it just changes the color once it gets clicked. Now you can do one more thing, that would be to remove the spacing from the placeholder of this input box, but I will leave it as is because I like it. So we are almost done with the styling of this password generator. Like, it's not exactly the same thing, but it's just something similar. Anyway, there are a lot of functionalities missing, but if I sit down and add these all of functionalities, it would take more than 1 hour. So we'll leave the more option for another video, but let's just create the JavaScript functionality right over here, and we'll end the video right over there. Anyway, we are done with the HTML and CSS. The next thing that we want to do is add the JavaScript. So for adding the JavaScript, the first thing we need to do is add a file in our HTML. That would be script. You can see instantly there is some problem in my Aram, I think so, or there is some bug, because whenever I try to add JavaScript, it will just destroy the color combination and stuff like that. Anyway, to add the JavaScript, I have wrote down script, and in the type I have given it text/JavaScript, and in the source we'll provide it the URL where we want to store our JavaScript. So in my case, it would be in the same folder, and I will name it app.js, which is not yet created. I will create it right now, and I will save this HTML. Don't worry about the color combination. As I said, it might be some bug in the Atom. So I will come over to my folder, and I will create a new file by the name of app.js, and I will press enter, and it will just create it. In order to check that everything is working, we'll just write alert, and inside that alert I will write hi and save it, and then come over to our Chrome, reload the page, and it didn't did anything. Let's just check it in the network that our file is added. I will come over to the networks and reload the page, and indeed, no, our file has not been added. And why is that? Let's find out. And our file is not being added because I mistakenly wrote SCR instead of SRC. If I correct that, come back to my Chrome, you can see that we have this file added right over here in our network. And we also have this alert on our page. Now that the file has been added, the next thing we want to do is like call a function once this button gets clicked. So that would be, you can name this function anything, but just for the sake of simplicity, I will name it generate password. And indeed it's a function, so we'll add a parenthesis and semicolon after it. You can also name it generate random password. It's completely up to you what to name it, but the generate random password would do for me. Now we'll just create this function right over here by typing function and giving it the name what we have specified in onClick. Now our function has been created. Now I can cut this alert from here and I can add it inside the function and save it, and then come back to the Chrome in order to check out that everything is working fine. And if I click this button, you would see that that function would get called. So our function is ready for some action. Now the next thing we need to do is add the mechanism for random password. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create list of characters, or the long string of characters. So that would be var char, and that's a variable created. Now to that variable we'll provide some values. Right now let's leave it empty. The next thing we will create would be var password, and that would be the next variable that we'll create would be for the password length. So that would be password length, and that would be equal to 16 initially. We'll change it later on. Anyway, the next thing would be our original password, so that would be var password, and right now let's leave it empty. Okay, so let's just add some values in it. So we will add numbers from 0 to 9. We'll also add ABC till Z and also some special characters. You can make it more complicated as well, and as I said, later on we'll give the user the functionality of changing the complexity of their password to be generated. But right now let's just take this static just for the sake of test, and let's just test it out. Anyway, once our variables in the JavaScript is created, the next thing we need to do is take a for loop, and that for loop would loop through each and every character and pick random each time. So that would be for var I, and it will start from 0, and this I would be less than the password length, and each time it will jump 1, like we'll increment each time, the like in each iteration we'll increment the I with 1. Okay, now we need to write the actual functionality for generating the random password. So that would be each time we need one character out of this this long string that we have created. So for each iteration of the loop, which will run 16 times, we need one either number, character, or an alphabet. So for that we'll create a variable by the name of random char. I can say number, but it won't be appropriate because we need a random character each time the loop runs. Or let's just make it a little bit different. Let's just make it random number. We'll generate a random number, and on the base of that random number we'll pick a character right from here. So that would be random number, not number, it's number. Okay, so that would be like for generating the random number we'll use the math library, and that would be math.floor, and inside that we'll provide the math library again dot random. This time the R is small, and the next parameter we want to provide is star char, the length of, like what we want to do is create a random number, and that random number should be inside, like if the length of this character is 100, so that random number should be inside 100, not more than that. If that's like if the length of this character is 100 and we generate a number 200, then we won't be able to get data from this. So that number that we have generated, that random number, should be inside the length of this character. So that would be length. and that's it. We'll generate a random number using that. The next thing we would do would be to, let's just console log this random number and see what we have. I will save the program and I will come over to this Chrome. I will click on inspect and come over to console. I will press this button and you will see that it will generate random numbers, like 16 times it will generate random numbers, for each iteration one number, and it would be random and it would be inside the length of that string. Now that we know that the random numbers are getting generated okay, the next thing we need to do is create the password. So in each iteration, once I create the random number, I want to concatenate something from this character string. So that would be chars dot substring, and this substring is a function which we can call off of any string. If you're willing to explore more about the substring, you can just Google it and you will find more info about it. Now the first parameter it receives is the starting, like where do I need to start, so that would be the random number, and where do I need to end, that would be random number plus 1, and I will add a semicolon and press Ctrl S in order to save it. Now that our password has been generated, the next thing we want to do is append this password to our input box, whose ID is password. Now in order to append the password to our input box, what I will do is I will write document dot get element by ID, and what this document dot get element by ID does is it grabs the element from HTML DOM using its ID. And what is the ID right over here? We have given it the ID of password. So I have copied that, and what I want to do with this is I want to set its value. So I will just write dot value and make it equal to the password we have generated. And do note that I'm doing this assignment of this password to the input box outside the for loop. So you do need to notice that. Once I do that and save everything, come back to Chrome, reload the page and try to generate the password, we get error. And we have error right over here, that is char, not chars. Once I do that, reload the page again, press this, you would see that it will generate the random password every time I click this generate password button. So this is pretty much it for this video. In the next video, we maybe work on further customizing this password generator. Maybe or may not be, because I will decide later on what to create a video on. If I found something more interested than this, I will create a video on that. But till next time, stay cheeky breeky, enjoy hacking, and peace out.